been wanting to talk about Rustie for quite some time on this channel. I think if my memory serves me correctly, I've never actually had much of an opportunity to bring up Rustie since the birth of Not Real Music, since like 2017. I don't think he's dropped much since then, and if he has, it obviously wasn't noteworthy enough to really bring up a mention in a full review or anything like that. So, of course, we are here today to talk about Glass Swords. One of the best albums, I think, of 2011. Spoilers for the video already. But I think if you know the album well, you wouldn't really be that surprised hearing such a claim like that. Hopefully you're in agreement with that, but if you are not, I'd love to know why in the comments, because I think this was a really good album to introduce a lot of the music nerds at the time, and for a decade onwards, to the world of the creative, wonky electronic music. Not that he invented it or anything like that, but I think there were artists at the time doing similar things, and of course Rustie has stood the test of time, because a decade later this is still great. It interestingly starts off very tame, you know, you get the introductory track, which I don't think wants to give away too much. It's almost like it's hiding something, just to then get into the album on the, you know, second track after, and then reveal what's about to come. It flies into flashback very mysteriously, and that track is the dawn, the birth of the creative, playful and idiosyncratic style that is to be very much explored on the rest of this album. You've got the track Surf, which again represents the era that this album came from, the time period that we got this music. It's very much like Tonight. If you've never listened to Tonight's music, I think the 2012 EP is probably worth your time. The cartoonish and overly bright sound of this track is almost like it could have featured in the Lego movie. I don't really know how or why, but it just seems to work for me. Maybe some kind of variation of this sound featured in that film, and I'm just not quite remembering it. I don't know, maybe they were trying to make tracks sound like this, and this is where we're at. Hover Trap's one of the best tracks here, should I say. This is just such an unusual rhythm. Like, wow, what is going on here? It sounds so great, but yet again, it sounds a bit strange, which I think is pretty much indicative of this album, actually. I think the synth clashes are very much welcome on this one, but the rhythms that are often, again, idiosyncratic and off-kilter make this album stand out in such a great way. I don't think many artists would have the vision that Mr. Rustie has here. City Star has freakish synths though. Like, I feel like a clown is staring into my soul. I feel like I'm, you know, in the film It, and, you know, I'm being stared at in a way that I don't want to be stared at. Or maybe I'm just terrified because I'm stuck in the remake of It, which wasn't very good. Am I allowed to say that? I mean, I'm allowed. It's my video. It wasn't very good. Ultra Fizz is a track that really set up the decade in a way that I think might have been potentially influential in the kind of, you know, EDM formula that we saw for the rest of the 10 years that came after. I would love to know the influences of many of the EDM artists that had huge hits for the 2010s, because some of them have got to at least mention Rustie. Like, they must have Rustie in their mind. Obviously, Rustie never had a huge hit, so, you know, I know a lot of people would probably not recognize the name if, for example, I don't know, the Chainsmokers cited Rustie as an influence. They probably don't, but there's got to be some of them. There's got to be some of them, because this drop really strikes you and just really feels so indicative of what was to come in popular music. It's why I love doing this series, because as much as I think more music reviewers on the platform should do a series like this, I'm happy that I do it, because it's really interesting to look back at something that came out exactly 10 years ago, because you suddenly realize that Some albums did more than I think anyone could have probably predicted at the time. But the hand claps on this thing, the way it progresses in such a peculiar way, especially by the end where all of the sounds just come clashing together and it sounds super creative. But just that initial drop is what I'm thinking of here. I'm gonna have to read up on this. Someone must have cited Rustie as an influence. This track is so good. Speaking of influences though, the track Cry Flames feels very Skrillex influenced. Obviously Skrillex, was pretty big in the dubstep world with the, the chiptune vocals that come through as well on some of his tracks. And this track just has all of that. It's really interesting though, because sometimes stuff like this can really grate on my ears, but this example here does not do that, really. I think it sounds really good. Afterlight is spicy and feels like the big event of the album, although it isn't necessarily my favourite track because of that. In fact, I think All Night, which is very close to it on the track list, is slightly better. I think the vocal sample is used really well there. But this just does feel like the huge moment that the album brings, and just everything comes together in such a great way. It just has like a clean feeling that I think, he just kind of managed to master everything he was doing on every other track. Like I say, it doesn't necessarily make it the best one, but I could see why people would call this the best track. It just feels like the vision and the end product lined up so well. And Crystal Echo closes out the album in a way that I think just ties up this album so well and manages to encapsulate the album cover perfectly. It's got such a shimmering brightness on this one. The nature of it is exactly the glassy, gleaming album cover. I think this track just makes me feel like I'm living in the world of the album cover. If that sounds corny or even cliche, then I do apologize, but I think this track really does that more than many albums are able to achieve. And that's it. That's the album. I think it's fucking great. It's aged so well. And yeah, sure, it's not the best of its kind. I think there are other albums since then, and other artists since then that have slightly done this a little bit better. But even then, it's not a detriment or not an attack on Rustie. I think he influenced a lot of what came after. And still, like I say, great album, really enjoyable, just constantly is shifting and grabbing your attention in a completely new way with every different track. It's so good, and I hope you like this as much as I do. 10 years later, I think it's great. So let me know your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching this video. Subscribe if you haven't already. You should, for more videos, and have a good day. Goodbye. Goodbye.